Okay, and today I'm joined by Dr. Husna Ahmad, who is the CEO of Global One, which is a faith-based international NGO focused on women. She has a PhD in international environmental law from the School of Oriental and African Studies from SOAS, and she is an honorary fellow of the Edward Cadbury Centre for Public Understanding of Religion at the University of Birmingham. She currently serves as a board member of Faith for Climate, Faith in Water and Palmer's Green Mosque, and she's also a member of the Women's Faith Forum UK. And in 2010, she was appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire in the New Year's Honours List for her services to disadvantaged people for work promoting social justice with disadvantaged communities. So Dr. Husna, it's a pleasure to have you on, honour to have you on as well. Thank you for spending your time here. Let's just get cracking into it. Could you tell me a bit more about your background and how you got into studying environmental law and becoming a research fellow at the University of Birmingham, and what led to the OBE and all the work you've been doing there?
Okay. So, Assalamu alaikum. Basically, for me, I think what was significant was that I looked at Islam as a complete way of life, as we all do. And if that is the case, then that means that every aspect of your life has meaning from an Islamic perspective, and you need to look at things from an Islamic perspective as, you know, as something which is a whole. So whether it's the food that you eat, the way you dress, the way you greet people, the way you take care of your neighbors and your community, and look at the, you know, diaspora communities in the UK as well as the people in the global South. You know, you look at everything from the perspective of Islam. And, you know, so for me, it was very, very important when I first read a book by Fazlun Khalid many, many years ago on Islam and ecology. And that really inspired me to look at international environmental law when, you know, I'd completed my LLB and LLM. And I focused on, because I'm ethnically from Bangladesh, I focused on my PhD on Bangladesh and looking at sustainable development in Bangladesh in the agriculture and fisheries sector. But I completed my PhD, oh goodness, over 20 years ago. And at that time, you know, it wasn't a subject that was, you know, much known about. And, you know, when I started moving in the environmental circles or the faith circles, what I found was, you know, there were hardly any Muslims that were involved. And it was very much a white middle class women, you know, who were, you know, caring about the environment and concerned about it. That's one aspect. The other aspect that I think is important is why I even wanted to move away from law and into working in the third sector, in the charity sector, within civil society. That was very much because of 9/11. Because after 9/11, I think we all, you know, realized that things are really going to change for Muslims. And what we wanted to do was try and find ways where, you know, we weren't othered, as is the case. How could we as Muslims build bridges between us and other communities, and really show the shared and common values that we all have and work together in a lot more, you know, in harmony. And that's where the social justice comes in, and the work that I did with Faith Regen Foundation, which led to me receiving an OBE from the Queen in 2010, because we worked with disadvantaged communities from all different faiths, and we helped them get jobs, you know, because we realized that, you know, what was most important to people were having a roof over their heads, having a table with food on it, being able to care for their family, having good education for their children. And that's what we supported. And that was something that I felt, you know, if you look at policy level, you know, it probably doesn't seem that important, but for the individual that gets the job, the individual that's able to support their family and be independent and have dignity. I think dignity is a key word that I want to share with you, because I think particularly for women, you know, being able to have dignity and honor and respect, I think, you know, that is something that's critical.
Okay, that's quite interesting, quite a full life as well. You mentioned you did your PhD research in Bangladesh. So what were you looking at in Bangladesh in terms of the environmental issues?
Oh goodness, this is many, many years ago now, but it was basically on the legislation and the legal aspects. So because it was on international environmental law, so it was more on the legal aspects of agriculture and fisheries and land rights and all those sort of things. And as I said, at that time, there wasn't much legislation on the climate at all. If it had been more recent, for instance, I just recently have been involved with climate reframers over the past couple of years. I've been receiving correspondence and things from them. And, I was thinking to myself that if they had existed, over 20 years ago, when I was sort of getting active, that would have been incredible for me. I would have found like-minded people from similar backgrounds to myself that, I could have worked with. But it was a lonely journey, and people didn't, really understand the work that I was doing. So I think that's something, in a way it's good. And I think even today it's very, very relevant, because I think when you look at the scientists and what they're saying, for the lay people, it just goes over our heads. We don't understand, what they mean by all the terminology. So I think for me, what was really, really important is two things. One is simplifying the language, and the other is making it faith sensitive, so that people making it basically bite sized, so that people can understand what we're asking of them. Because if you think of climate change, oh my God, it's just, you've only got 7 years until the climate catastrophe. You have no idea what's going to happen. How can you or I, as individuals, what can we do? But we can do so much if we understand the impact of the different aspects when we're looking at mitigation and adaptation and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you read Fazlun Khalid's book, Islam and Ecology. What things, if you even remember it now, what things stuck out from it that made you want to study environmental law and focus on that?
It was just incredible, because I hadn't read anything like that at all. I hadn't even realized the connections, and because when we're going to the masjid, people are just so absorbed in explaining to you about the prayers, and it's important for you to pray and do du'as, and and be a good person, and don't sin, and wear hijab, and keep long beards, etc., etc., etc. But in terms of caring for the environment, all of those sort of things, those aspects weren't sort of passed on to people, even though that they're there. And now I think about it, for instance, with my parents, in terms of repairing old things, and being moderate and not consuming too much. All of those, I think, were ingrained over the generations. And I think now the generations that we have now, it's completely different. It's very much consumerist, a generation that we have, and the throwaway culture, waste, recycling. All of these things were there in the past, but people were recycling things, were careful about waste disposal and things like that. But that's really, really changed. And I think the Western influence has not, there's things in the West that we've taken on as Muslims, or as people from the global South, that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, exactly. So you read Islam and Ecology, you did a PhD in environmental law, and then you focused on people who have impoverished and help them get jobs.
Yeah.
You mentioned this was multi-faith.
Yeah.
Whereabouts was this? Was this in London? Or
yes, in the organization that I worked with, we started off in London, and then when I left, we had 10 centers throughout the country. And one of the reasons I actually left was because I just felt that when I had started working, it was under a Labour government, and then the Conservatives came in, and I just felt that we were just going back to the drawing board, where it came to diaspora communities and BME communities. So I just felt that I had done my bit, and there wasn't much more that I could really do. So that's why I decided to leave. But the organization is still running. And at the moment, I think it's helping women in domestic violence and things like that. So they're doing some good work.
okay. And I think I mentioned in the intro, you've been involved in various other organizations as well, like Muslims for Climate and Water and so on. How do you get involved with those, and what kind of work have you done with that?
You mean Faith for the Climate?
Yeah, Faith for the Climate.
I'm a trustee of Faith for the Climate. They approached me, and I'm very happy to be a trustee of that organization, because I think it's a networking organization. It's an organization that links up with different campaigns and causes, and is doing some fantastic work. So I'm very, very pleased to be involved with them.
And have you found in your experience that Muslims tend to lag significantly behind when it comes to engaging in environmental organizations and environmental work? Because in my experience with speaking to people like Fazul Khan, and he tells me when it comes to multi-faith and environment, the Muslims are always behind, and people actually ask for Muslims to come on board, but they're rarely to be found.
I think that is definitely the case. I mean, I've experienced it myself in terms of trying to get funding for some of the projects that we're doing. People don't really understand it. Muslims understand giving food, doing wells, shelter, things like that, which are really important, obviously. But I think developmental projects and more sustainable projects, I think people are not so keen on, and don't realize. Maybe they do realize, but things are changing now. So I think, from my experience, particularly in the UK, there's a lot more that could be done, and a lot more support that we could get. People who are involved in environmental activism or policy level work. There's a lot more support that we could get. I think what Muslims don't understand, the importance of policy and advocacy. I think that's something that we're still really, really lagging behind on. I'm part of an initiative called Ummah for Earth, which is we have, I think, about 25 or more organizations from around the world that are involved in that. And that's a beautiful organization, because what it's trying to do is really advocate for more global climate movement for youth, for Muslim youth. And I think, that's something that I'm really excited about. And one of our colleagues, she was in Egypt just before COP last year, and she was being interviewed about it and talking about the work that Ummah for Earth is doing. And part of that Ummah for Earth work, we launched, it's been 2 years now, our Green Guide to the Hajj and Umrah, which is the second edition. About, I think, 2011 we launched the first edition, and the second edition's come out, and we're hoping that we can get the app to be used by people who go on Hajj, inshallah.
All right, nice. And you mentioned that Muslims don't understand advocacy properly. What key things do you think we need to know?
I think it's not so much that they don't understand advocacy. I'm saying that they don't understand the importance of giving funding for that. So institutions that could give funding for advocacy and campaigning and things like that. That's something really critical. So, for instance, in my organization, we do a lot of advocacy and a lot of campaigning, etc. But it's all done in a voluntary capacity. We don't have the funds to pay for staff to be doing that. So we're having to take time out of our normal day jobs to be able to give for that. So, for instance, I'm the global coordinator of something called the Alliance of NGOs and CSOs for South-South Cooperation. And we have 500 members of that alliance in the global south, but my organization is the secretariat for it, and we work in collaboration with the UN, but we have no funding. We're doing this because we really believe in it, and we see the importance of it.
Yeah, I think many Muslim organizations suffer from funding issues. I think primarily because they're so donation driven. We don't think about like endowment funds and things like that, and investing that capital and then reallocating a proportion of revenues towards charitable activities. I think we have a lot to learn in that regard. But I think there's interesting work coming up now with green waqfs and things like that. Muslims are innovating in this field, so hopefully might get some funding soon.
I think things that we need to move away from the normal model of funding, where funding goes from the north to the south, and people are supported, beneficiaries are supported, but then there's still a need. We need to make them independent. As I mentioned the word dignity earlier, we need to make people independent and let them have their own livelihoods and live a life of dignity and honor. And I think when COP27 came last year, the key sort of messaging that was coming out of that was the concept of loss and damage, because if you look at the global south, where majority of the Muslims live, they're not the ones that cause climate change. It's the industrialized nations in the global north that really abused their consumption, and through their consumption and their greed has caused climate change, and yet the people who are impacted the most are in the global south. So there really needs to be some reparation for them. So I'm glad that there's a finance mechanism that's being established to support the global south to find ways of creating sustainable jobs and looking at adaptation and mitigation to support these nations.
Do you think it's too late for mitigation now? As in, there's so much carbon in the atmosphere. The Earth has been changed so much that it's too late. We can't go back to where we were. We just have to focus on adaptation now.
Well, they're saying that if we can go down to 1.5, then there's a chance. So the fear is that, if we really need to see if we can keep to that. Yeah. And I think, there's a role for, young Muslims in the UK, because you're based in the UK, I'm based in the UK. I think there's a huge role for us, the youth particularly, to through their creativity, through their voice, through advocacy, to really bring about change. And I think bring our governments to account. There's something called 0 Hour, which is in the UK. It's trying to push through a climate change bill and everything. So there's a lot of things happening. So I think our Muslim youth need to get involved and really understand what's happening and have their fingers on the pulse about what's happening. Because there is a climate catastrophe coming, and we can see the impact already. We've got so many droughts. I mean, I think this year we're going to have some really severe droughts which can lead to famine in Somalia, Kenya, Sudan, different regions of the world. And then obviously you've seen the floods in Pakistan and elsewhere. So there's a lot of things happening which are just could have been avoided if people had taken action earlier, but Allah knows best.
Yeah. Just last year there were droughts across the world as well. I think in the UK, America, Europe, China, and river levels got to places where they haven't been for hundreds of years. Yeah. So
absolutely,
we'll probably see more of them. I was asking about, do you think that because carbon dioxide, it stays in the atmosphere for about 200 years. So even if we stop polluting now, temperature would still rise because they'll stay there for 200 years. Do you think it might be too late now to mitigate climate change? Maybe we can get it to 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, but do you think the focus has to be on adaptation now and financing adaptation?
Well, I'm somebody who's very hopeful always. And as Muslims, we are always hopeful for everything, isn't it? So I really don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I can't really answer that question. I think adaptation is something that we really do need to look at, because if you look at migration, already you're seeing, people screaming and shouting about the refugees coming to this country and, not happy about them coming and all sorts of things. And, with climate refugees, it's going to be huge. The migration is going to be huge. And people, when they see that something's coming, they don't wait for the impact. They start migrating earlier. And usually it's the men that migrate and the women are left behind with their children. So that's also, in terms of my organization being a women's organization, Global One, I think, that is something, when you're talking about adaptation, how can we support women to adapt to the environment that they're living in, and support them to have security, safety, away from any sort of sexual violence even, those are things that we really need to look at as well.
Your organization, you mentioned you focus on women. Is it primarily women in the UK or is it globally?
No, we have 7 country offices in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And we work at 3 levels: policy, resources, and then intervention on the ground. So at the policy level, we are able to advocate a lot. We work with universities and UN, World Bank, and others at a policy level where we're able to input and support them. And then in terms of resources, we produce things such as the Green Guide to the Hajj and Umrah, Islam and mental health, menstrual health management. So, there's different things that we're sort of looking at. And I think, we really recognize the importance of the mother as well in all of this, as being the core of the family unit and how important her role is.
Okay. You mentioned the Green Guide to Hajj and Umrah. Hajj is, I think, 3 months away now, 4 months?
Yeah.
You just mention a few things we could, and if anyone's listening, what they could do to make the Hajj a bit greener. Because obviously you have to fly there anyway, and that's a massive, carbon issue.
Yeah. So what we did was we produced this Green Guide to Hajj and Umrah, and if you look at Hajj before COVID, it was say about 2.5 to 3 million people were converging in one place. And the thing is that during that time, they move at the same time everywhere, isn't it? So you can't avoid that. But then apart from that, you were having about 10 million people just going for Umrah in 1 year. Obviously now the numbers have decreased, but with things opening up, it will slowly start increasing again, and people will be wanting to go particularly for Umrah. I think what we need to recognize is the power of the consumer. I think people don't recognize that. So when you're booking hotels, when you're buying food, the consumer can actually demand a lot of things, So I think, one thing is that plastic bottles, the amount of plastic bottles that are wasted and thrown, and the amount of pollution that it causes, it's horrendous. So if the first thing is, if people go with these sort of bottles where they can refill, because throughout the Kaaba and elsewhere you can fill your there's water filling points where you can fill your water bottles. That's one thing. The other thing is that when people are making the niyat, when they're making the intention, what we really would want is more khutbahs, talking about the environment, and training, which the training that people go to before they go on Hajj, they have I think about 3 to 6 months training, having training on the aspects of walking, treading lightly on this earth. That aspect I think is really important. So we have an app that I can share with you afterwards that we want people to trial out, because we try that out and then we can roll that out properly, which has both the spiritual side as well as the physical and the aspects of treading lightly on this earth and protecting the environment. So for instance, waste, you're making sure you take your waste with you after you've eaten, not throwing it away. It takes the Saudi government a month or more just to clear up all the waste after Hajj,
Wow.
And in terms of the amount of waste that they have, I think I've got the figures. It's about 15 million tons of waste are generated annually in Saudi Arabia, but only about 5% is recycled.
Wow,
So they have got,
waste.
they've got I think a 2030 vision that they and waste management initiatives are at the core of their 2030 initiative. But there's I don't think we won't have much time to talk about it all, but I can share the book with you. And
definitely, Do you think, is just here's an idea, do you think Muslims, especially from the, let's say, UK, or America or Europe, they should limit the number of times they go for Umrah because of the flights and the carbon involved with how much pollution a flight causes?
I think even apart from Umrah, I think the Hajj, a lot of Muslims go on Hajj more than once. So I think definitely they should limit it to once. And if they need to say, I know that some people have to do the Hajj for their parents or something like that, that's different. But limiting to once. And then again, people, I think now, because of the after the war in Ukraine and everything, I think the flight prices are going up anyway. So I think that automatically will cause less people to be traveling so much, I guess, because the flights are, I think, doubled or something in terms of the costs. But flying, people really should try and limit. But having said that, you know, there's so many things that all of us are doing, and for our work we have to travel, and there's no other option but to fly.
Yeah. You also mentioned that you're also part of the Palmer's Green Mosque, right?
Yes, yes.
What can you describe that mosque? Because I've never heard of other than the Cambridge Mosque, I've not heard of a green mosque.
Well, the Palmer's Green Mosque, it's not green, it's Palmer's Green is the area.
Oh, okay. I thought it's an eco green mosque.
But we have, you know, in our mosque, we do have solar panels, and we had them for many years now. And that really helped, especially now with the energy crisis, you know, that's really helping and supporting us to be able to heat and light our masjid. We're hoping that, you know, maybe after Ramadan, we'll get some planning permission to extend our mosque so we can have, you know, more spaces for the congregation. And we have greenery around. We've had bushes that have been planted by the musallis. But we need to do a lot more, honestly.
Okay, and as far as mosques goes, it's fairly green then.
Yeah.
We'll call it the Palmer's Green Eco Green Mosque.
Yeah.
No, Ramadan is coming up, right? And Ramadan's actually, it's a time of actually, despite it being a month of it's meant to be a month of fasting and hunger and discipline, Muslims tend to consume more in Ramadan.
Yeah.
Muslims put on weight, and the amount of food that we waste, and especially doing all the dawats and stuff like that, which, you know, it can be problematic in some sense. Do you think we have a cultural issue with Ramadan in the sense that even non-Muslims now, when they ask you about Ramadan, they think about all the food we're going to eat and how diverse and amazing the food's going to be. When God says it's the month of the Quran, He doesn't say it's a month of food. But we've turned it into this cultural phenomena where we just feast on al-iftar instead of focusing on the core aspect of Ramadan, which is the Quran.
I think you're absolutely right. You use the word cultural, and I think that's the aspect that we need to try and move away from, because in so many of the things that I'm involved in, it's the culture is different from the faith. And, you know, it's a culture that causes a lot of problems and a lot of issues, you know, particularly for women. So I think, you know, if we could try and limit, you know, because if people, it's the women who are cooking all that food that you're talking about, the women
who that takes time away from them.
Yeah, they're not able to do their ibadah, and you know, and it's more sometimes women find it more stressful and just, you know, have a negative attitude towards it because they feel, oh goodness, you know, Ramadan's the time I've got to be in the kitchen the whole time and cooking and stuff. So I think it's a family thing. I think the families themselves need to realize that, you know, it should be a time when you know, one person, you know, the focal person, as I said again, the mother is not spending all her time in the kitchen cooking, etc., etc. In terms of waste, I think I was in Montreal in December at the biodiversity conference. It was COP15. It's not like COP27, but it's not the COP on climate change, it's the COP on biodiversity and nature loss. And what came out of that was 4 goals and 23 targets. And one of the key things that came out of that was that by 2030, you know, really halving waste and consumption. And I think, you know, Muslims, that is one thing. If we take one thing that we would want to do, and we can start it in Ramadan, is how do we consume less, and how do we limit waste, and how do we manage waste management, for instance, you know. That would be one thing that I would advocate for, and I think, you know, would be something that we really could look at, you know, as Muslims.
And mosques as well, there tend to be a lot of waste in the masjids, especially during Ramadan, with the water bottles and so on as well.
We don't, in our mosque, we don't allow water bottles. We have the water dispenser, so people can take water from there. Yeah.
Okay, that's really good. That's really good, because in Birmingham it's chaotic where I'm at.
Okay.
It's just
and I think the other thing is that we consume a lot of meat. You know, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you know, in terms of his meat consumption, he would consume meat maybe every 40 days or, you know, something like that. We consume meat on a daily basis. I mean, you know, even my children, you know, they like their chicken and they like their lamb and whatever. So, you know, trying to get them to change, you know, is something that has to be done intentionally. We have to have that intention that, you know, we're going to introduce a lot more vegetables and fish and other items rather than just meat, you know. I think in Birmingham, whenever I come up to Birmingham, I I end up having lots of meat, at the restaurants or wherever. Yeah.
I think part of the issue with that is because we're so cut off from the modes of production, especially food, we don't understand what it takes and what goes into actually rearing an animal, how long it takes, the effort, and then slaughtering it. So we think it's easy to go to the shop, buy, get some meat is easy. But if you just spend time on a farm, think about how long it takes to rear a sheep or something or a lamb, and then the whole process, and we'd naturally consume less meat, but because we're so cut off from that, we don't really see everything that goes into it. And that's what we end up consuming more. Because I think if naturally you're raising a sheep yourself, you're not going to eat a lot. You're not going to eat a lot of sheep or lamb because it takes a lot of effort to raise, takes a lot of effort to even slaughter and clean and so on.
And if you look at our communities, like if you look at the, say, I don't know if you're Pakistani or, yeah. So I'm Bangladeshi. So in our communities, cholesterol, heart condition, diabetes, all of these things are, it's becoming, really, really bad. So we need to find ways in which, we can change our lifestyles and, moving away from meat consumption, doing more healthy exercise, really thinking about the fact that we should have, in our stomachs, 1/3 for food, 1/3 for water, 1/3 for air. We should really be thinking about that a lot more, and thinking about tayyib food as well, because if you look at chicken or other meat production, which isn't organic, again, that also has an impact because you're letting all these the meat which has been injected with growth hormones and all sorts of things enter your body or your child's body. So I think we need to really have that consideration as well. But having said that, in our communities, in the Muslim communities, there is poverty in the UK. So being able to afford organic is also an issue which makes it prohibitive. So we need to start thinking, how can we change that? And I have also seen that in terms of poverty in the UK, I remember a few years back we did that, 1 week of eating, spending £1 a day on food, and I've tried that myself, and I saw that I couldn't eat fruits, I couldn't eat vegetables, because you just can't afford it. All you do is you end up having potatoes and rice or something, sort of things that are carbohydrates. So you stock you eat lots of carbohydrates, which aren't healthy. So
I bought a bag of carrots for that once.
Did you? Yeah.
I had bread and carrots. That was my food for the
yeah. So the thing is that how do you look at climate? And that's why climate change and things like that, it's the middle classes that are concerned about it. The people who are worrying constantly about being able to afford to feed their children with the cost of living crisis now. People, have they got time to think about the climate, or are they thinking about, how do I feed this child? How do I make sure that the room is warm? How do I make sure there's hot water to give them a bath? All these things are in their minds first. So what is the solution to that? That the government really needs to make the environment and policies on the environment much higher up in their agendas.
Yeah. And just a final one on mosques and Muslims. What do you think is the role of mosques in general in terms of combating the climate crisis, and as we talk about sustainability and reducing waste?
I think
and so as a follow-up, then how do we get there? Because mosques are very hard to actually change their committees. They're very political, very slow to move. And so one part is, what is their role, and then how do we get there?
I think in the first instance with mosques, trying to get women on their committees and having women as trustees, I think that's something that's long overdue. I think that's something that has to be done, and throughout the country. I think the mosques should be the beacons of awareness around climate change and the environment, about biodiversity, about protecting the species, about protecting bees. They should be the ones who are really focusing on that. And the majority of the mosques have madrasas in them. So the madrasa teachers, should, part of their curriculum should be honestly teaching our children about, their duties as stewards of this planet, and that we have to, think about this planet as something that we have a responsibility towards nature, and that it's a trust that's been given to us, not something that we just do what we want to do. So I think, learning is imperative for all our imams and our leadership in the masjids. So we should have a program throughout the country, and organizations like MCB could be leading on that, and or the Minab and others should really be leading on this and pushing forward. And then I think at the community level, I think the musallis, the mosque community, they should be really thinking about their mosque in terms of the cleanliness, in terms of the environment, in terms of how to beautify it with plants, and really support solar panels, etc., etc. So simple things, as you just mentioned about the water, making sure that we don't have plastic bottles. I know that, for instance, the Sikh community, they are doing fantastic things, and they use metal cups and plates and things, and the community goes and washes up and cleans, and then they feed the people, etc., etc. So there's a lot that we can learn from other communities, because if we're the stewards of this planet, what are we doing? We're really behind on everything.
Yeah, definitely. I think another issue, so when I work for IFES, we actually have imams come to us from various parts of the country and say, we'd like to talk about the environment, but we haven't been educated on it. Because in their curriculum, in their 5, 6, 7-year curriculum, there's nothing on the environment. It's just like usul hadith, fiqh, tafsir, things like that. So I think there's an education problem as well. And also with the UK specifically, a lot of our imams are imported from foreign countries like Pakistan or Bangladesh or somewhere, right? And part of the issue that, at least in Pakistan, where I know is the culture is, if you're smart as a child, right, you'll become a doctor, engineer, lawyer, right? And if you're dumb, you'll become a Mulana or a Mulvi. That's just how it works. If you're clever, you go to university. If you're dumb, you go to madrasa. And then we import those people from the madrasas who are effectively not the very most intelligent people into our mosque, and they become the educators of our children. And that creates a subclass standard. I think that's another issue we need to address as well. Like, I think it relates to your funding aspect as well. If we can fund the mosque properly, we can attract talented imams and train and offer good training, then that will naturally improve the quality of the services we receive as well.
I hear your point, but it's not rocket science to take care of your environment. It's not rocket science to be a steward of this planet. Somebody who's completely uneducated from the village will understand how to plant in their garden, or their in a space, in a plot of land, better than you and I. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the qualities that our brothers who come from the global south bring to this country. What we need to do is reassure them, build their confidence, because I think if they're always nervous about, they're going to be sent back, or they're beholden to people in the community, rather than given that honor and dignity to grow and develop themselves, I think that is a huge issue. Can I just give one example?
Yeah, sure.
We have in the Rohingya camp in Bangladesh, we have health posts. We had 4, now we've gone down to 1 health post, again because of funding issues. But when the Rohingyas, after the genocide, first came to Cox's Bazar, to that region, the land that they were given, where they were having all the camps, it was just very barren. It was, the soil was, really dry, and it was very sort of not green at all, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then I went back again last year, and I've been back before the COVID, before COVID, we were planting some trees and helping them and whatever. But what we noticed when I went last year, it was completely green, because the Rohingya people, they're agriculturists, they're farmers. So when they came there, they were planting everywhere, any space they found, they were planting. So it's very green, and they're able to really turn it around so wonderfully. It was just incredible. So for us, I wouldn't have a clue. I just went and planted a few plants when I was there, a few years back or whatever. But I think we really need to go back to the people who have come from the villages or from the farms, and really the knowledge that they have to share with us, I think is really critical. We developed a toolkit on Islamic farming, and that is really saying that the smallholder farmers are the ones that should be looking after the land and doing agriculture there. And we saw a 50% increase in yield just by them not using pesticides, using natural ways of planting, and having rotational crops, and then having livestock that would be able to fertilize, their dung could be used for fertilizers, and then the irrigation methodology, etc. And it's wonderful how even today, I mean, this is a few years back where we established some farms in Nigeria and in Kenya, and it's still going, and people are able to, make money out of it, and they have beehives there, and the beehive owners, they're just being able to sell the honey and bring money. But the main thing is that they're able to have their own livelihoods, and I think that's significant, and we need more people in the UK to be able to support and help all of us to try and see how we can have plots of like allotments and things that we can grow, especially in the cities like Birmingham and London. Having allotments, I think, is something that's really good, and we need to have local resources, local farmers, and support them, local businesses. Yeah, sorry, I've gone off point. Sorry about that.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. I think you were mentioning that people from the global south do have a lot to offer as well, which I agree with. They are more connected with nature. Like, if there's an issue with agriculture in the UK, our society would collapse into anarchy because we basically can't grow our own food. But in those countries, they can. So there's that stability in that sense, in the sense of whatever happens, they can always grow food, and so they'll be able to survive, which is an advantage in that sense. But I would say about the global south, I've been to Pakistan, and that's where I'm from. If I look at the streets of Pakistan, they're filthy. They're covered in litter, and it's also no surprise that in the Muslim areas in the UK, where the majority population of Pakistanis, they're also the dirtiest areas in the UK. The UK is generally quite clean, except when you go to a Muslim area and it's quite filthy. And that's something I think we definitely need to address as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you mentioned earlier, it's the training. You said that people haven't had curriculums in their schooling and things like that. So I think, people like Brother Fazlan, for instance, Fazlan Khalid, he's an icon in terms of the environment. And I think, the sort of foundations that he's laid, if we can really build on those and, develop proper training. I mean, there's something under the UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme, called Mizan, which I know the IFES is involved in. And I think, from that, if we can then trickle down to the communities, training and khutbahs and other things, I think those are things that are really, really vital. But I think, faith literacy and faith sensitivity are critical to help people change their mindset, because, as you said, if people don't change their mindset, they will continue to think that having dirty, streets or dirty roads in front of them, and their houses, in whatever condition, they'll think that's normal and that's acceptable. But Islam tells you completely the opposite. Islam tells you that cleanliness is so important. Your environment is so important. How you take care of your children, their presentation, how they are dressed, in clean clothes and things. All of this is vital, and giving them tayyib, good clean food, is important. So what you put inside you also, is vital. So I think, we've got our work cut out for us. But I think, generations like you're the next generation, you and the next generations. I mean, you're the ones that will have to lead and, bring that sort of, localized change to our communities, in the UK.
I already feel like I'm no longer the next generation is the one after me. The 18-year-olds is them.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we'll end it there. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We talked about quite a few things, mosques and education and environmental nature and Hajj and Umrah and all that kind of stuff. I think our listeners will enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you for coming on.